All right. Thank you everyone for coming and welcome. Welcome to the first part of our two-part online discussion series on the oppression of women and the struggle for reproductive rights in Argentina. This event is hosted by Speak Out Socialists. We are a revolutionary socialist organization. We see the many crises that we confront today, from climate change to global warfare, famine, and the rising cost of living, health crises, women's oppression, racism, violence, and more, as the direct result of capitalism. This system is based on the constantly increasing exploitation and immiseration of the vast majority of the world's population. Instead of utilizing the advanced technology and resources of society to meet the needs of the majority, society is organized to benefit a tiny minority of the population at the expense of the rest of humanity, the planet, and its ecosystems. In order to avert the complete collapse of our ecosystems and alleviate poverty and misery around the world, we believe we need a society organized according to the interests of humanity, rather than the profits of a few. To accomplish this, we see an urgent need for working and poor people to come together and build organizations capable of transforming society. And we see the fight against the oppression of women as central to that transformation. The oppression of women plays a key role in the functioning of capitalism and has a profound impact on us all. Because of this, revolutionary socialists throughout history have acknowledged that the fight for women's liberation is central to the fight for socialism, and women have played a central role in those struggles. That's why we host events like these. Today, Laura will discuss the roots of women's oppression as the first part of our two-part series. Next weekend, Sunday, October 9th, at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time, we'll be joined by Juliana Cabrera, an activist in the women's movement and member of the Partido Obrero Workers' Party of Argentina. She will discuss the recent fight for reproductive justice in Argentina, which succeeded in winning more than we've ever seen in the US. Abortion access, without question, for whoever needs it, up to 14 weeks, provided at public hospitals. Make sure not to miss this exciting presentation and discussion where we'll learn about the struggle. Laura, our speaker today, is a high school teacher and activist in Speak Out Socialists. She's been a socialist revolutionary since the 1980s, when the US-backed wars in Central America compelled her to become active. Please welcome her and stick around after her talk for a discussion.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. And thank you, Eden. I appreciate the little intro. And I just wanted to say I'm going to be speaking for about 20 minutes. So grab a pen, because if you have thoughts, if you have questions, if something that I say doesn't make sense to you or something really resonates with you, I'm really hoping that you'll be able to bring it up in the discussion and that we'll be able to really engage after the talk. So with that, let me get started and say, I'm guessing that if you're here, you want a society without gender oppression and without male domination. Right now, women's oppression around the globe takes so many different forms, and the extent of that oppression really varies widely. In some places, like in Finland right now in the government, women lead. While in others, in fact, in all around the world, there are women who are victims of human trafficking and the sex trade and domestic violence. And certainly we know that there are women who are being subjugated to rules controlling our reproduction. So while this oppression and gender stereotypes are deep-seated and baked into the current cultures around the globe, there have always been women who have fought back, whether it be for the right to control their bodies, to be paid for their labor, or for better pay, or in more extreme cases, to dress the way they want to, like Mahsa Amini, who was killed recently by the morality police in Iran. And not only that, but the fights of women have sparked massive movements that have toppled governments, from the fight for bread by the women workers of Russia in 1917, which led to a revolution, to the more recent struggle that led to the ouster of Sudan's president, Omar al-Bashir, which was massively dominated by women. And there's a super cool article on the Washington Post about women in Sudan's history that I'll throw in the chat when I'm done. But what I want to start by saying is that actually this oppression, which is totally commonplace at this time in history, is an anomaly in the story of humans on this earth. I don't need to tell you that we live in a society that's divided by social classes, with the rulers being the captains of capital. But that word capital, it may not mean much to everyone here. So I'm just going to explain what I mean when I say capital. So capital is the wealth that is accumulated from centuries of exploiting human labor. This accumulation of wealth from exploited labor worldwide has led to the formation of huge banks, of a class of financiers, owners of multinational corporations, and the families of the 0.1% that collect dividends from their family's ownership in these multinationals and banks. This wealth that they have is capital. That's what I'm calling capital. And the class that owns it, that's the capitalist class. So this culture that we're living in is one in which we're surrounded by a world of owners who work if they choose to, or hire employees to manage their assets, while the majority of us work for them so that they can accumulate more profit. Workers are dependent on that paycheck, and this culture where we go out looking for a paycheck is as ordinary for us as breathing. And so most of us have come to think of that culture as natural. So my question is, can this class society coexist with the end of gender oppression? Can we have full access to healthcare for all people and time off to raise children, whatever our gender is, along with healthy food? Can we choose freely when to have children and control our reproduction with ease? Could we imagine men also playing an equal role in controlling their reproduction and taking responsibility for raising children, along with an equitable distribution of the labor in our homes? Can we have an end to what now is a really extraordinary violence exhibited by some men that's unleashed on others in general, but most ordinarily in an everyday manner, unleashed on women, trans and non-binary people within this culture? So from a Marxist perspective, I answer that question with no. And I want to explain why, and I want to give an idea of how we can fight for an end to the oppression of women. So my starting point is that there's nothing natural about male domination. The culture that we're surrounded by on Earth today is not natural, nor has it dominated our human life on this Earth. So this is what I mean when I say that the way that we're living today on this Earth is an anomaly. So I'm basing this on enormous amounts of information that we now have about societies outside of our capitalist norm. Maybe some of you have seen the previews for the movie The Woman King with Viola Davis. Outstanding preview, by the way. It's about the kingdom of Dahomey, where an all-female army known by the Europeans and probably by you as the Amazons were trained to protect the kingdom and enjoyed tremendous respect and responsibility in the leadership of that kingdom. So I can't wait to go out and see the movie. In the 1800s, the Europeans were really shocked when they were first exposed to an entirely different society in what came to be known as the place where I am, the Americas. A guy named Karl Marx and his friend Frederick Engels first heard of the Iroquois people by reading an anthropologist named Morgan. Morgan had contact with the native peoples of the northeast of this continent, and he reported that here, men and women had equal authority. And elsewhere in the Americas, he found the same thing. And this led him to believe that there was nothing natural about the position of women found to be normal in his European society. Later, someone you may have heard of, Charles Mann, who's a contemporary writer, he wrote a fantastic book called 1491 about life on these continents that were on before the arrival of Christopher Columbus. And he wrote, "The Iroquois created a highly egalitarian society. One British colonial administrator declared in 1749 that the Iroquois had, quote, such absolute notions of liberty that they allowed no kind of superiority of one over another and banish all servitude from their territories. Sounds pretty good to me. So since that early contact, and based on so many more accounts of life around the globe, it's become really clear that there is an extraordinary amount of variety in the way human beings have organized themselves to live. Dahomey people and the Iroquois are only two examples of human culture where women enjoy tremendous respect, where they hold power and they have authority. Now, most of these examples have been and continue to be written off or misrepresented by the dominant culture in our society in order to rationalize the status quo. What did dominate for most of human history is societies that are involved in foraging and hunting for game or fish, and sometimes along with the simple cultivation of plants. And in most of this pre-class society, women enjoyed status and respect that was unimaginable for us living today. And for most of this human history, it's understood that rather than the domination of males over society, we've seen the collective activity of all humans and cooperation. Sometimes this was with some gender roles, sometimes without roles for gender. And when there were roles, these didn't necessarily mean exploitative relationships or a power differential. A division of labor doesn't have to be gender-based, and it doesn't have to mean a differential of power. We also see that there have existed societies where a gender binary wasn't imposed culturally. The term two-spirit or twin spirit is an umbrella term across Native American cultures for a person who embodies both male and female spirits within them, hence two-spirit. So where does the low status that we see today come from? Why did women become literally men's property? And was this inevitable? So there is so much we don't know, but we do know that in some parts of the earth, in Asia, in Europe, and in Africa, classes developed in agricultural societies. In many class societies, though, where plants could grow, women already played a crucial role as foragers and cultivated an extensive knowledge of plants and seeds. In some places, this led to the development of sedentary peoples and the production of a surplus of food that could be stored. In Mesopotamia, that crop was wheat. In Asia, rice. In southern Mexico, corn. So this surplus created conditions for the possibility of one group of people to live off the labor of others. And I'm going to repeat that. The surplus created conditions for the possibility for one group of people to live off the labor of others. It doesn't mean that it had to develop that way or that it developed that way everywhere. The surplus that developed in some agricultural societies allowed for the division of society into groups that labored for ruling class. Taking slaves in wars would have been unthinkable in a society that had no sedentary life and where every person needed to participate in labor for the collective to thrive. But with the ability of one person to do the work to feed many more people, the opportunity to exploit others exists. And this is the crucial point. A surplus created the opportunity and the possibility of social classes. Does it mean it happened everywhere unavoidably? No. But without the existence of agriculture, it wasn't possible to develop a class society. And where this did take place, it didn't happen fast. It took place over hundreds of years and with many inhibiting factors. This much we do know. Once class societies developed, with slaves taken in battle and private property having been established, the egalitarian governance and the high status for women broke down in many places. So why was it most often not women who went into battle, who armed themselves, taking slaves, ruling agricultural lands? The people of Dahomey provide a notable exception to that. Why were women relegated to strictly managing life in the home and producing and caring for children? In the Roman Empire, the word familia, or which we call family, referred to the number of slaves belonging to one man along with the wife and the children. Why was this so? Did it stem from pregnancy and the birthing of children and nursing? Most likely, yes, because going into battle while nursing a child is seriously problematic. The Dahomey women warriors did not have children. I think it's fair to say that once agriculture and surpluses developed, the societies that were organized for war won out over those that were organized collaboratively for art and cooperation. And so what we are left with is agricultural societies, class societies that were organized for war. And we see this obviously with the European conquest of this continent. But you take a people like the Hopi people in the Southwest, for example, they were an agricultural people. They had a matriarchal family structure. They were very peaceful people. To the extent that they survived and their culture survives, elements of their culture survive, it's because they managed to survive by hiding out in areas where the Spaniards didn't want to settle. But sadly, their culture is very far from dominating our society today. As a result of the domination of those who were organized for war, it is a fact that men have come to dominate the cultures of the overwhelming majority of class societies with a patriarchal structure where women were treated as property or are treated as property, and the land was passed down through the male line over generations. And cultures where this was not the case have been overwhelmed by ones where it was the case. So what happens once there's property? Once there is property, with a well-established class system of owners, we see the rise of laws to protect that property and to protect the interests of the owners. But those laws mean nothing without armies and police to defend them. So in this situation, women who have now become part of the family, which means owned and without a voice in the ruling of society, they lose their power. And they find that the man of the family can defend his will, not only with the force of his personal violence, but backed up by a violent police force, army, call it what you will, as well. And once a culture is established, we are all indoctrinated into it at birth. The rulers of the society dominate our ideology as well, and they educate the young through every possible means. And in this way, women themselves can become deeply enculturated in passing down the subjugation and the belief in the need to submit and obey, passing down that submissiveness to their female children. The culture that we've been handed down is one in which the oppression of women is really deep-seated, and the fight over our right to control our reproduction is one facet of that oppression. But by denying us that right, we play a huge role in maintaining male dominance. So how do we turn this around? How do we do that and grow a culture that's not patriarchal, where violence against women is unacceptable, just as it is generally against human beings, and where all of us, regardless of the sex that we're assigned at birth, can play a role in caring for babies and children, as well as running the whole society? Well, first off, it's important to be clear that capitalism benefits tremendously from the subjugation of women. There is a benefit to the subordination of women within the family. That means that capitalists, whatever their personal beliefs are about the intelligence and the abilities of their female family members, benefit from the subordination of women. Because where this culture of subordination of women dominates, women who are completely indoctrinated into the ideology of patriarchal society tend to work with minimal complaining and have the habit of accepting that they are the ones to care for the children and feed the family. I'm gonna go into the personal for a second and say my grandmother is a classic case. In spite of such a strong personality, in spite of a sense of justice, in spite of raging generally against injustice, not only did she do all of the housework and all of the childcare with not a finger raised ever by her husband, in addition to working a job as a piece worker in the garment industry, but she imposed the notions of proper female behavior on her children and her grandchildren. She called her daughters sluts at the slightest infraction. And yet, at the same time, she was furious about it, furious at her husband. So there's this contradiction of fury against what is obviously unjust, and at the same time, an acceptance of this imposed order as ordained by God, and the attitude of imposing that order on the rest of the family. So let's go back to the benefit of having someone play that role in the family. First, within the working class family, women do countless hours of unpaid labor to make sure the entire family is fit to work. Women care for the children, making sure there's a future generation of workers, but they also care for the laborers within the family, doing basically the shopping, the cooking, the cleaning, mending clothes, preparing lunches, shepherding children to their schools. In today's society, where the income of one worker in the family is not nearly enough to care for the family, most women do most of this work, in addition to having a job that pays a wage. So where there's no workers' union that establishes pay rates between women and men, women are paid less because they're culturally trained to accept. And that was certainly the case in my work as a teacher. Before we established forcefully a pay scale, the men were all making more than the women because they asked for more at the beginning, which is really a cultural behavior. And you can see that male domination in the family, that hierarchy inside the family that we accept, mimics the hierarchy in society at large rather than the idea of a collective. And so the acceptance of domination within the family translates well to acceptance of domination outside the family and vice versa. So in addition, the various churches that inculcate the idea that contraceptives are sinful and abortion is murder, they contribute to the production of more children. And children become workers, and more children means more cheap labor. And families that are burdened by the labor that's required to care for more children are also, generally speaking, just more burdened, oppressed, pliable, malleable, manipulable, and under the boss's gun. And I say that, let me just add, that's only true until they reach the boiling point and explode. But on a day-to-day level, it's exhausting. So how does this relate to our situation regarding the end of Roe and the fight for our reproductive rights and for gender equality today? So for those of you who were at the town hall last week, you heard Jenny Brown frame the fight for our reproductive rights as a fight of all working people for complete access to healthcare, including reproductive healthcare and unrestricted access to abortion. And she connects our right to refuse reproductive labor, which is to say, our right to abortion, to our demands for improved reproductive working conditions. So that includes the provision of childcare, healthcare, paid leave, shorter hours. So we can imagine that during this fight, we can promote a culture of mutual respect, egalitarianism, and solidarity. But for this fight to ultimately succeed, it's important to be clear that we can't stop once a mass movement gives us legal victories. Why? We need to end the rule of the capitalist class because it has a vested interest in exploiting working people, and it benefits by setting us against each other and inculcating a sexist, homophobic, racist culture to divide us. Imagine, with state power in the hands of working people, we could change all the messaging. We could work collectively to heal the planet, meet basic human needs, save civilization from global heating and climate chaos. After the fight to do so with that state power, it'll still be a long evolution toward a new culture that we can only imagine because we carry this old culture within our own thinking today. In the coming period, there will be mass movements that offer us the possibility of a total transformation of society, of the working population taking the power away from capitalists. We are the majority. If this weren't possible, we would still be living under the rule of kings with divine right and the right of the first night. Societies do change massively. Remember that it was only 250 years ago that this country had a revolution. Today, the fight for reproductive rights and full access to healthcare for women, real healthcare, preventative and beyond, and of course, the right to an abortion on demand. This fight, which goes hand in hand with the fight to defend the rights of LGBTQ people, And any and all fights that break the gender boundaries that have been normalized in capitalist society, these fights are ones that can only succeed with a massive mobilization of our power. But as we mobilize to demand our rights, it's essential that we educate working people around us to understand the need to go beyond just demanding our rights within capitalism. Because anything that's given to us within this framework, with this government and its state, its laws, its hold on us in the workplace, can be taken right back. This is a sham democracy that's really just a fig leaf covering up what is basically a capitalist dictatorship. Look at what just happened with these 9 justices revoking Roe and setting us back 50 years. So if we win a right and we leave them with state power, we leave the agencies that create the laws, that enforce the laws, and we go back to our lives as wage workers, they will always undo what we fought for, and we'll find ourselves needing to start all over again. So now we fight for the rights of women, of LGBTQ people, for reproductive freedom, for access to real healthcare for all, but we also educate to allow this and all the fights that arise against power of the capitalists to take us beyond capitalism itself, to take the state power in our own hands, and to rebuild a society with entirely different norms and an entirely different morality. So I'm going to stop my talk here.